Zelina gazed in front of the heavy iron cage, her tall, slender figure shaking with anticipation. The human inside she called Beast. Everyone claimed that humans were fragile and tame. She thought she had finally caught the biggest threat. But unknowing to her, the true danger lay not in the man inside the cage. It dwelled within the wild beast of his spirit. Zelina's world, Araquil, was built on facades of safety. The Zinder, they called themselves, proud folk of glimmering violet hide and curious, great-eyed visage. Their city-state flowers rose from the plains as tall spires of crystal-infused steel. From these high heights, the Zinder believed they reigned over all they surveyed. They tamed huge creatures called Ragarons, trained them to plow fields, moved small things with their minds, their powerful mental abilities. But though they had all this ability, they had never met humans before. When news reached the Zinder of a mythical being caught in the far reaches of the Great Border, a creature of their own, a hum, the Zinder went wild with delight at its prospect. Rumors swirled. Humans were crafty but weak. If they had any strength at all, it was only in technology. They were no threat at all, without armor or weapons. And to show for it, the Zinder queued up to see the creature Zelina had taken. Tall and lean man with odd pale-colored skin behind the bars proudly proclaimed Zelina as she unveiled the caged man. She paraded him around on a hover platform and referred to him as Beast, in homage to the rumors about his savage nature. Zelina was the youngest daughter of a minor noble clan, more famous for her inquisitiveness than her political heft. As a child, she had subdued small creatures with a soothing, melodic hum and a gentle touch. Her tutors were in awe of how she could soothe all but the most nervous of animals. When she listened to stories about the hazardous human, she was filled with excitement. If she could subdue such a creature, she would gain respect and fame. The beast would be her crowning triumph, her living proof that not even the fiercest of creatures could withstand her patience and skill. What Zelina didn't realize was that this human named Ethan was anything but weak. Actually, Ethan's whole life made him ready to be a survivor. Growing up on a brutal mining colony on another planet, Ethan taught himself to survive grueling work conditions. He was raised with a distrust of authorities and the ability to read people's intentions. He was not a soldier by training, but he was sharp on survival skills. When Zinder scouts took him captive, he chose to remain silent, watching them, allowing them to believe he was too weak to fight back. Ethan gauged Araquil from inside his cage. He had seen how the Zinder depended on their mental talents to perform small miracles. He sensed their arrogance. They showed their wealth on their robes. Their society appeared to have been constructed around the concept that they were the pinnacle beings. In his mind, a devious plan took shape. If he seemed docile, they would not monitor him too closely. They dropped their guard. That is when he would attack. Zelina, on the other hand, visited him every day. She played gentle songs in the Zinder language on her songa, thinking it calmed him. She set out fruit and spiced water and praised him when he accepted. For all that Ethan was as she envisioned, though, he also was learning everything he could. Little by little he learned more. The guard rotations, the security protocols around the cage, how Zelina used the technology that held him captive. It was the Zinder culture he found so fascinating. Their enhanced mental capabilities enabled them to levitate small items, as well as perceive emotional states. Their telepathy was somewhat limited, however, as they could not read even simple human thoughts without direct physical contact. Zelina wielded her powers lightly, trying to sense Ethan's moods. She felt only a silent acceptance, which confirmed to her that he was a tame man. She never suspected that his serenity hid something much more sinister. In Araquil's great society, animals who could be cowed were revered as lesser members of a natural order. The notion that any beast could turn the tables on its captor was unfathomable. Zinder had bragged that it had dominated everything from the flying serpents of the eastern mountains to the digging squatters that consumed metal ore, and humans, they had figured, would be no different. To this point, all they had witnessed of Ethan was a weary form, devoid of the fangs or scratchers common to dangerous prey. So Zelina's tamed beast was a curiosity. Noble people came to her estate to gawk at the caged human, marveling at what she called Zelina's talent. Some offered to buy him. Zelina refused. She wanted the glory and the recognition for herself. For her, this was a great experiment, the evidence that her gentle ways could tame any beast, no matter the ferocity of the predictions. But with each passing day, the real Ethan awakened. That was because Ethan had been misled by the Zender into thinking everything was about technology, but it was not at all. Ethan had on his side a very different type of power. Savage, naked cunning, and an iron will that could not be so easily crushed. He observed the Zender's rituals, learned their routines, and waited. A beast may roar and thrash, but Ethan's silence could be the greater danger. He saw chinks in their armor. He noticed the hubris of their kind, not anticipating cunning from a supposedly lesser creature. Rumors of odd occurrences filtered back to the city. Merchants were mumbling of shadows that roamed the night, of powers outside the walls of the spire. Others said an ancient menace was stirring in the wastelands. These rumors were of little concern to Zelina, who was more interested in flaunting her prized captive. She never guessed that soon these external threats would crash into her own illusions of control. But behind the scenes, Ethan's patience was wearing thin. He dreamed of freedom. He recalled Earth, recalled the colony he once called home, recalled friends killed in alien raids. He would tear the bars from his cage if he had to, but he wanted a stealthy infiltration. If the Zender were willing to think they trained him, he would let them think so until it no longer suited him to do so. Beyond, an unexpected tempest was brewing. Zelina's pride and Ethan's carefully suppressed instincts were about to collide. What would she do if she ever found out the truth about his mind, about the real beast that lay beneath the semblance of civility? Could she accept the fact that humans weren't the soft, defenseless creatures that they had been brought up to believe? Or would she hold on to her illusions, even as they crumbled around her? In the end, it came down to one question. Who was the real beast, the caged man who rendered himself mute, or the naive noble who thought she'd broken him? The fate of both the Zender's self-image and Ethan's survival lay in a delicate balance, and time was running out. Zelina's estate sat on the rim of Araquil's protective dome. He wore a tunic with Sweden printed across the front, as if he were a human t-shirt. Beyond it lay fields of tall, blue-green grasses undulating with the wind. She walked the perimeter of her property every day, feeling safe from roving Ragarons behind energy fences. She never worried about a person escaping, and yet questions started to gnaw at her. One morning, she went to Ethan's cage with a tray of fruit. She was sure she saw something new in his eyes, a flicker of what could have been amusement or maybe pity. She thought it was just her imagination. How could any human ever think of her with pity? Zelina went about her business despite her reservations. She would talk softly, explaining in her soothing voice how pleased she was to witness him becoming quieter in her hands. Then she would put down the fruit and look at Ethan eat. Her sense packing picked up little emotion from him, mostly a mild curiosity. Maybe. But at the level below that, his mind was far more complicated than that, bubbling with stratagema and ulterior motives that Zelina's feeble mind-reading could not perceive. Life in the estate, meanwhile, bustled on. Servants serviced Zelina's private gardens, and guards roamed in relaxed shifts. Neither thought the human was a threat. During his rough outings around the grounds, the guards made jokes about how soft and polite this macaw was. Ethan's determination was only strengthened by their laughter. He put up with their teasing, feigning ignorance of their language. But he had already picked up much of the Zender language by listening attentively while the adults talked around him. In the orderly passing of time, the first sign of an external disturbance arrived in the shape of refugees. Unknown creatures had attacked a distant Zender settlement. These refugees spoke of beastly shapes that stalked the night, ripping through villages and leaving a trail of destruction. Zelina's father started receiving messages, begging for help. Gradually, the Spire Council formed the troops needed to fight against the incoming threat. Zelina observed the city's preparation, but kept her eye on her tamed beast. A stubborn voice in her mind said she should quarantine him or even transfer him to a safer facility. Still, she hung on to the yearning for validation. She had already vowed to expose him at the soon-to-come festival in the main square, where nobles from all over the vast realm of Araquil would gather. The attention would all be focused on her and the compliant human she had allegedly trained. Ethan noticed the mood shift on the estate. Extra guards hung out each night, more worried about outside forces than the man locked in the courtyard. He also got wind about the festival brewing. He figured this was a perfect chance for him to make a move. With crowds at the event growing, chaos could create cover for his escape, or for something much more dramatic. Privately, though, Zelina started to feel like Ethan wasn't quite who he claimed to be. Every once in a while, he would catch her eye, and her heart would race. She was not able to read his thoughts very well, but she sensed a current of power. Sometimes she dreamed of something more dangerous than any Ragarons, a creature that wore a human face. She awakened feeling cold and trembling, dismissing the sensation as nothing more than a nightmare. One evening, checking on him in his cage, she spoke softly to him. "Beast, do you even know what I mean? Do you know that I mean no harm to you?" He stared at her. For a split second, she thought she saw understanding in his eyes. Nothing reflected back in her mental gift. Ridding herself of the notion, she turned away only to miss the slight smirk that creased the corner of Ethan's mouth. What she didn't know was that Ethan had managed to find a small structural weakness in the cage's locking mechanism. He could break out whenever he desired, but he would wait until the right moment, when he would get the biggest reward. He wanted to observe the Zender's expressions when they discovered the beast was far from tamed. Most of all, he wanted her to witness her own folly, for Zelina had put much effort into parading him around as her own personal conquest. Tension in the city mounted over the remote attacks, and the Spire Council was called. They claimed that the outer estates, Zelina's among them, ought to be fortified. It was assigned soldiers, but they gave the caged human little more than a passing glance. After all, he was in a cage, and he looked so composed. If anything, they joked, he could distract a beast, or perhaps his girth could be a useful shield in case the unknown beasts ever attacked. But the real threat was already inside the estate, past those iron bars. Ethan observed how the new soldiers pitched camps, how they rotated watch hours, and how they bore advanced plasma rifles. These rifles required periodic recharging every few hours, and a portable energy generator would have been needed. If he could get hold of one of those weapons, he was sure no cage in the city could hold him. Meanwhile, Zelina was caught between two worries: the alleged monsters attacking the countryside, and the odd feeling her prized prisoner wasn't what she was convinced he was. The latter fear she attempted to dismiss, zeroing in instead on city gossip. Others claimed the unknown assailants were ancient protectors, roused from slumber by the planet's changing climate. Others muttered they were an invading horde from beyond the stars, more barbarous than humans had purportedly ever been. One evening, returning from the council chambers in the main spire, Zelina saw a guard unlock Ethan's cage to bring him fresh water. The guard momentarily turned his back, not caring. One heartbeat later, she saw Ethan's hands clench. Her pulse raced, convinced he was about to jump out. But the human only lowered his gaze and let the guard finish and relock the cage. The guard walked away, unaware how near he might have been to danger. Zelina's mind whirled. Had she imagined tension in Ethan's posture? And had he intentionally let the moment pass? Why would a wild animal pass up such an opportunity to flee? But there was something nonsensical about it. The more she thought about it, the less she believed the stories of human frailty. Maybe humans had an entirely different kind of strength, one cloaked behind layers of patience and guile. At the same moment, the external threat loomed ever larger. Reports circulated of units of the Zender militia disappearing near the border towns. It was a night watching for huge, faceless beasts. The city's Spire Council wrangled over extreme options, including complete eviction from outer estates like Zelina's. But the festival was still set to take place. A beacon of Zender perseverance. Skripal in 2018, canceling it would create widespread fear, and the council would not show weakness. Thus, preparations continued. Brightly colored banners were strung from each tower, and vendors sold alliterative exotic foods and trinkets. Zelina intended to lead her captive to a special exhibit space, where she would declare her victory to the world. She'd prepared a sweeping address, explaining that the Zinder were not afraid of barbaric beasts, not even of humans. In her mind, that display would lift spirits and prove that Zinder had made a pet of any beast. The festival felt like Ethan's best shot. He thought the crowd would cry out when he broke his shackles. He imagined the look on Zelina's face when she realized the leash had never been in her hand. Between the Zinder focusing on him and the external monsters threatening the city, the Zinder could hardly focus on him. Maybe they would be too distracted dealing with the beasts beyond their walls to notice a much bigger threat within. Every step took them closer to a point of no return. Zelina's illusions about humans were about to be shattered, though she did not yet know it. Ethan ate his food like a blade. He waited for the perfect moment to strike. The city prepared for an invasion, but its real concern was which monster was going to make the deadliest move first. The marauder they had locked beyond the fields, or the man they were naive enough to name Tame. Festival day broke in a hot flush of pale sunlight. The spire's polished towers shimmered with celebration, bright streamers fluttering in the wind. Music hummed in the air, and crowds began converging on the main square. Vendors sold sweet pastries and hot spice drinks. Guards marched past in ceremonial armor, attempting to look relaxed, though the tension was palpable. Ethan's public debut was in the hands of Zelina. He was accompanied by a team of 4 guards, chains clanking as they marched him out onto a large platform near the center of the square. A force field encircled the platform for the protection of spectators. Zelina had taken her spot on a raised podium. She donned her finest robes, a shimmering lavender embroidered with gold. In one hand she held a thin baton, emblematizing her dominance over the creature she showcased. "Fellow Zinder," she announced, her voice booming over hidden speakers. "We come here today to celebrate our resilience. We face threats we don't know. There's something out there in borders, but we are all strong. To demonstrate our ability to harness even the most ferocious of creatures, I give to you the human, my beast." The crowd murmured, leaning in closer for a better view. Ethan's first impression was such that nothing about him stood out. A tall man with short, dark hair dressed in plain clothes. He looked calm, almost bored. 1 or 2 gasps went through the onlookers, but most looked unimpressed. Was this really the horrible beast they had heard so much about? A few snickered. "He doesn't look dangerous," one said over the fray. Some murmured, "He's so still. Are you sure that humans are savage?" Zelina waved a hand for silence from the crowd. She described the way humans had created disorder on worlds far from here, but how this one was entirely in her power. She took credit for her soft touch, for training him without cruelty. She talked herself into rage, inflaming her own pride. But as the speech droned on, Ethan surveyed the assembly. At each corner of the platform, there were the force field generators. He also mentioned the cluster of city officials sitting behind Zelina. They appeared to be on edge, likely having heard whispers about the beasts that reportedly lurked closer to Araquil. Admittedly, the council had almost called off the festival only a few days beforehand, but custom prevailed over caution. Zelina left her speech with a final touch. "So you see, my friends, even a savage human may be brought low by the Zinder spirit." She aimed the baton at Ethan. "Beast, kneel." The crowd held its breath. Ethan looked back at her with a cool, unreadable gaze. For a tense beat he did nothing. Slowly, he sank down to one knee, keeping his eyes locked with hers. There was the sound of tentative applause, although many looked uncertain. Zelina's heart raced within her breast. The way he stared at her made her feel small, like she was the one being put on display. But there was no time to dwell on it. There was a sudden blare of a shrill alarm from the spire's watchtowers. The audience went still, and the city's public address system came to life. "Warning, a voice echoed. An unknown force pierced past the outer defensive lines. Citizens, remain calm and proceed to shelter. Council members, proceed to the command center at once." A wave of panic swept across the festival. Dozens of people scrambled to grab their belongings and escape. Guards shouted orders. Zelina gazed in shock around her. Her father was at her side, begging her to retreat to the council bunker. "Leave the beast here," he barked. "We don't have time for this drama." Before she could answer, Something far off roared, a noise like mangled metal and thundering feet. A dark silhouette lurched outside the city square, plowing through line after line of quickly assembled barricades. It was massive, almost 4 times as large as a ragaran, and armored in chitinous plates. Its face had no features, other than a wide mouth full of bladed fangs. City guards opened plasma fire, but the beast ignored them, raking a huge claw through a squad of soldiers. Terror cries rang out as more monstrosities followed behind it, bulky shapes that barreled toward them with the force of a bulldozer. The mythical beasts had finally arrived. Zelina's father was pulled back behind her, and the guards formed a protective circle. "This is an invasion," a guard shouted. "The city gates must be closed." Council members rushed around, and the crowd broke into chaos. All this time, Ethan was still on the platform, still chained and behind the force field. He regarded the approaching monsters with the detached calm of someone who spotted a possibility. In the midst of the chaos, Zelina reasoned that were the beasts to make it through to the festival square, countless innocent Zender could die. She also understood that leaving Ethan locked up here was a risk in itself. If one of those monsters was attracted to him, it could rip straight through the whole platform, and in the process possibly hurt other people. She hesitated, wanting to keep him caged, but now knowing she must protect her people. Her father shouted, "Come on, Zelina. We have no time." They rushed to a secure transport with their guards. But Zelina glanced at Ethan. He met her gaze. Something in his eyes dared her to abandon him or liberate him. Her mind whirled. Could a supposedly tame human actually be of use to them? Before she could make a decision, one of the rampaging creatures careened into the square. With a roar, it threw a piece of debris which hit the force field generator. Sparks flew. The field winked out, exposing Ethan's platform. He still had his locks, but that hardly affected a man who had already found the flaw in their design. Zelina's father called for her again, but she stayed rooted in place, staring in disbelief as Ethan broke his chains as if they were made of flimsy string. He flew off the platform in one smooth motion. The guards surrounding him lurched around in shock, unsure whether to shoot the monstrous intruders or the newly liberated human. Ethan appeared to dissolve into the frenzied crowd. Part of Zelina wanted to run after him so that he would not escape. Another, more desperate part of him wondered if he could really help. He'd never seen her move like that, so fast, so controlled, like a predator. But suddenly she'd understood that the beast she thought she'd tamed was more dangerous than any mamba, or maybe even more dangerous than these invaders. Sirens from the city remained blaring, and the monstrous attackers kept pushing deeper into the square. Zelina saw a valiant group of soldiers shoot at the biggest creature, only to be pushed away by a blow from her claws. She followed her father with shaking legs, heart thumping. Everything was out of her control. Her festival, the prized captive on her estate, perhaps even her sense of safety. In the chaos, Ethan worked his way through panicked crowds toward the city's armory. He had seen a guard drop a keycard. Now it was his. The Zender thought of him a lesser creature, one that could be easily subdued. This was his opportunity to prove how wrong they were. As monstrous roars and screams racked the city, Zelina fled toward the command center. Her mind spun with questions. Had she unleashed a second predator on her people? Can she trust the man she once called Beast to fight by their side? Or will he use this crisis as his excuse to get revenge? Above all, she battled one haunting thought. She had never tamed him, but he had been calling the shots all along. It would set the stage for a reckoning that would change her world. The monstrous invaders menaced to tear the city to pieces. The Zenders, delusions of superiority, now lay in ruins. And a human predator stalked freely among them, not lured by Zender illusions, but by his own primal instincts. Whatever happened next would break every belief she ever held about who was really the beast and who was the master. Inside the city's command center, there was frantic energy. Council members shouted over one another, attempting to coordinate defenses. Alarm lights strobing on the walls bathed everything in flashes of crimson. Outside, the rumbling growls of the trespassers rocked the very towers that previously felt indestructible. Zelina came with her father, panting and stunned. Guards locked the doors behind them. Images from security drones showed the beasts rampaging through the outer blocks on giant screens. Their skin was also as tough as armor, and all plasma fire had bounced off it. Worse yet, they moved with eerie follow-through, enwrapping defensive lines and pinning squads of Zender troops. The city was losing. She put her palms on a console to steady herself. She remembered when Ethan broke his chains. His silent strength, lurking behind that challenge to her fortitude, had haunted her. She had claimed to have domesticated the wild man. Now, she knew her ignorance. A loud alert drew everybody's attention. One of the drone feeds showed an armored figure rushing between the monsters, firing what appeared to be a salvaged plasma rifle with lethal accuracy. Zelina's eyes widened. Despite the grainy quality of the video, she knew him. Standing at full height with the marrow of his soul turned to steel, Ethan blasted at the joints of the creatures, deftly avoiding their strikes, exploiting weaknesses the Zender missed. He single-handedly dropped one of the smaller beasts to the ground in a hail of plasma bolts, its thick shell exploding apart. Council members gaped. "Who is that?" one asked in awe. Another stammered, "We had no such record of a skillful warrior in our ranks." She realized Zelina couldn't say anything. Inside her, pride and fear battled. The man who she identified as Beast was turning the tide of a war that no Zender soldier could so much as handle. Soon, more camera feeds appeared, matting Ethan marching a few bewildered guardsmen out of the smoking ruins. He shouted short orders and fractured Zender, gesturing at roofs for perches and urging them to fire concentrate on exposed appendages. The ungodly invaders shrieked as deadly shots lanced their armored hides. If only for the moment, it was working. Zelina's father took advantage of the opportunity. "He is the human you killed, Zelina," he said to the council. "He seems to be there fighting for us. We must coordinate with him." Some members of the council hesitated. They still saw humans as mere curiosities. But the proof before her was indisputable. Ethan could fight, and he was better at it than any Zender there. Zelina experienced a peculiar rush of relief. Maybe he wanted revenge, but he shouldn't. Perhaps he had a reason to be of assistance. Finding her courage, she offered to escort the city's troops to his location. Her father reluctantly agreed, seeing no other way. After the council patched her into the city's broadcast channels, she ordered the scattered squads to follow Ethan's lead. The last stand occurred in the central plaza, where the biggest of the creatures, a giant that loomed several stories high, roared in fury. Its leathery skin sparkled with heavy, black scales. Ethan led the group, intent look in his eyes. Like clockwork, he barked orders to the Zender squads to surround the beast, unleashing volleys in choreographed succession. He went after its joints and soft underbelly. Zelina sat heart-pounding back at the command center screens. If they didn't succeed, the spire would collapse. But then the monstrous invader faltered, its roar crystallizing into a last, anguished shriek. It cascaded, landing with a thud that rippled the earth and Franklin itself with a quake that shook buildings around the neighborhood. Cheers rang through the feed, and Zelina was filled with gratitude. The lurking menace was finally quelled, much thanks to the very human she'd underestimated. She felt that she owed him more than she could ever repay. A few moments later, the battered city fell silent. Smoke poured from shattered buildings lined up along a road, and the once proud festival stalls lay in ruins. But the monster attackers were dead or fleeing. On all of the screens, the image of triumph was always the same. One man standing there, leaning on a plasma rifle, eyes fixed on the devastation with wearily resigned acceptance. Zelina knew the truth now. Humans were not prey. They were apex predators, capable of kindness, yes, but also with a fierce capacity for danger. She had not tamed him. She had just contained him for a moment. And when Eriquil most needed it, it was Ethan's wild, uncontrolled ferocity that saved them all. By nightfall, the fires in some districts that had been ruined were controlled. Wearied Zender troops scoured the streets for survivors. The city's once mighty spires had been singed, but they remained. Medical workers treated the wounded in the makeshift tents set up near the central plaza. Reunions of families, grieving dead relatives, and celebrating narrow escapes. Ethan strode through the remnants of the festival grounds, bruised but unbowed. The plasma rifle had been tossed aside in favor of helping to lift debris and save citizens who found themselves trapped. Where Zinder eyes had previously regarded him with disdain or curiosity, now they looked at him with cautious gratitude. Rumors circulated about the human who battled like tin soldiers. On the outskirts of the plaza, Zelina spotted him on his knees next to an archway that had crashed and was moving large rocks aside to free a young Zender child. She watched in silence until the child was out of danger and rushed to medics. Then she walked over, heart laden with guilt. For so long, she had perceived Ethan as an animal to be tamed. Now, she felt small beside his quiet strength. Sweat and dust streaked his face as he turned to her. They locked eyes for a beat. Zelina seemed at a loss for words. She started, her voice shaking. You saved us. Even after everything I did. Wiping his brow, Ethan spoke in halting Zender. Many of my people would have allowed you to burn, but I did see that there were innocents here. I did what was needed. Zelina's throat tightened. Every patronizing speech, every smug showing-off demonstration she had put on for him like an award. How ignorant she had been. Thank you, she said, her voice heavy with regret. Ethan was summoned by the City Spire Council. No matter how proud he was, they knew they owed their survival to him. They promised him freedom and passage, safe passage anywhere in Araquil. Their swagger of your lay shattered. Some even inquired whether he even would stay and train their soldiers. The shock of discovering that one human could do what their whole militia could not was still fresh. Ethan considered his options. He could leave this planet and go back to human lands with stories of the Zender's weakness. Or he could stay, forging a new relationship between humans and Zender, one built on mutual respect instead of mistaken supremacy. And as he did so, he first looked to Zelina, who stood amongst the assembled members. Of the council, her countenance modest. Zelina moved up, lowering her head in praise of his magic. We were wrong about your people, she said gently. I misunderstood you. If you wish to depart, I am not going to stop you. But if you can forgive me, maybe there's a future here. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. The memory of being paraded in a cage burned, but he also remembered how she'd hesitated during the invasion, the flicker in her eyes that had questioned whether he could save them. He had seized that opportunity to show that humans were more than just beasts. Finally, he nodded. I'll stay for now. There's a lot to rebuild. He reached across a hand in peace. Zelina, relief washing over her face, took his hand. In that delicate exchange, they forged a tenuous alliance that upended all the assumptions about where the leash junctures and where the collar gets worn. Ethan offered his expertise as the city struggled to restore power, water, and defense systems in the weeks that followed. He had trained Zender soldiers in the ways humans approach war, focusing more on innovation and make-it-up-as-you-go-ism than brute strength. He told them about different worlds he had visited, expanded their horizons of the universe. There were Zender who struggled to accept the new reality. They had always thought themselves above. But evidence of that was all around them in their bruised city, rescued by the same creature they once ridiculed. And a small shift began to ripple through Araquil. Pride was exchanged for humility, curiosity supplanted condescension, and slowly, a new respect emerged. Zelina, her fantasies laid bare, became the champion of closer relations with humanity. During the day, she helped coordinate relief efforts. By night, she was sitting quietly with Ethan, hearing about his life, his people, his struggle. They became an odd pair, and one that was not without its own qualities of shared responsibility and a need to protect those unable to protect themselves. Still, questions lingered. But would the Zender actually accept this human's power, or would they one day resent him again? And what if others, less prone to mercy, showed up? The present danger had passed, but the future was uncertain. But as Zelina and Ethan gazed over the slowly healing city, the one truth was end clear. The monster she thought she had conquered was in fact her educator in humility and survival. Who had tamed whom, in the end? Silence descended in the ravaged streets of war, nighttime setting in. The stars twinkled in the dark sky above. Somewhere in that expanse of the cosmos, Other trials must have awaited. But in that moment, on Araquil, a human named Ethan had recast what strength meant, and an alien noble named Zelina had come to appreciate the truth of the power that did not come in subduing the soul into what the conqueror wanted. And thus began a new chapter beneath those silent stars for both humans and Zender.